Civilians, stay in the bunker. This is soldier work. The Marine sergeant's dismissive words echoed in Hazel Carter's mind as explosions shook Forward Operating Base Riverbend. At 28 years old, a civilian IT contractor who'd been fixing computers and maintaining networks for 6 months, she was supposed to hide when the shooting started, just another non-combatant to be protected by the real warriors. But when 50 enemy fighters breached the perimeter at 0300 hours, when the base's defenses crumbled under coordinated assault, when Marines were dying in corridors she'd walked every day, Hazel did something that would shatter every assumption about who could be a warrior. She grabbed a fallen Marine's M4 rifle, flicked it to full auto, and became a one-woman killing machine that would hold the line when everyone else had fallen back. In the next 6 hours, as bodies piled around her defensive position and her rifle ran red-hot from sustained fire, she would prove that sometimes the deadliest fighter on any base isn't the one with the most training. It's the one with the most heart and nothing left to lose. Hazel Carter had never planned to be on a military base in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. At 28, with a master's degree in computer science and 5 years of experience as a cybersecurity specialist, she'd taken the civilian contractor job for Forward Operating Base Riverbend because it paid 3 times her stateside salary and promised adventure. What she'd found instead was months of routine, maintaining servers, troubleshooting network issues, updating security protocols, the kind of technical work that kept a modern military base functioning but never made headlines. The Marines tolerated her presence with polite indifference, treating her like useful furniture, necessary but not someone they needed to think about. Hazel was tall and athletic, 5'9" with shoulder-length auburn hair she usually kept in a practical ponytail, and green eyes that held an intensity most people didn't notice behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She'd grown up on a ranch in Texas, had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bike, but that was ancient history. These days, her weapons were keyboards and code, not rifles and rounds. The base housed about 200 Marines and support personnel, positioned to interdict enemy supply lines and provide forward reconnaissance for larger operations. It was considered a relatively safe assignment. Enemy activity in the area was supposed to be minimal, more nuisance than threat. That assessment turned out to be catastrophically wrong. At 0300 hours on a cold October morning, Hazel was pulled from sleep by the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars. She rolled out of her bunk in the civilian quarters, her mind still fuzzy with sleep as the first explosions walked across the base. Boom, boom, boom. The lights went out, emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. The base alarm began wailing, and over the intercom came the voice of the duty officer, all personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. We are under attack. Hazel grabbed her body armor, all civilian contractors were required to have it, and stumbled toward the designated bunker where non-combatants were supposed to wait out attacks. But as she moved through the corridors, she could see through windows that this wasn't the usual harassment fire they occasionally received. This was something much worse. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the wire perimeter glowing with explosions as enemy sappers blew gaps in the defensive barriers. Beyond that, muzzle flashes in the darkness indicated a large attacking force, much larger than the scattered fighters who usually took potshots. At the base, she reached the bunker to find it already packed with civilian contractors, cooks, clerks, and other non-combatants, maybe 30 people in a space designed for 20, all pressed together in controlled panic. What's happening? Someone asked. Coordinated attack, replied Jack Morrison, the base's senior contractor, a former Army sergeant who'd been doing this work for years. Bigger than usual. They've been planning this. The bunker shook as explosions continued to rock the base. Through the thick walls, they could hear automatic weapons fire, not the scattered shots of a probe but the sustained firing of a major assault. How long do these usually last? Asked Sarah, one of the other IT contractors. Morrison's face was grim. This isn't usual. This sounds like they're trying to overrun the base. As if to confirm his words, the intercom crackled, all off-duty personnel to defensive positions. All civilian contractors remain in designated safe areas. This is a priority alert. They waited and listened, and the gunfire kept getting closer. 20 minutes into the attack, a Marine corporal burst into the bunker, his uniform torn and bloody. We need to move. The enemy has breached the outer perimeter. They're inside the base. What about us? Morrison demanded. Where do we go? Command bunker, if you can make it. But we've lost control of the eastern sector. They're everywhere. Through the bunker's small window, Hazel could see flames rising from several buildings. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like deadly fireworks, and moving between the buildings, she could see figures that definitely weren't Marines. We have to get to the command bunker, Morrison said, trying to take charge. Everyone stay together. Stay low. Follow me. They opened the bunker door, and immediately the sounds of battle crashed over them like a wave. Explosions, automatic gunfire, shouting in multiple languages, the roar of burning buildings. The smell of cordite and smoke filled the air. They moved as a group, 30 unarmed civilians trying to cross a battlefield. They made it perhaps 50 meters before the attack came. Enemy fighters emerged from between two buildings, at least 8 of them with AK-47s, and immediately opened fire on the group of contractors. The night exploded with muzzle flashes and the crack of bullets passing overhead. Down! Get down! Morrison shouted, but it was too late for many of them. Hazel dove behind a concrete barrier as bullets whined through the air where she'd been standing. Around her, people were screaming. Some were hit, some were just terrified. All were trapped in the open with nowhere to go. She looked around desperately and saw him, a young Marine, couldn't be more than 19, lying motionless behind an overturned vehicle about 10 meters away. His M4 rifle lay beside him along with several magazines of ammunition. The enemy fighters were advancing, preparing to finish off the scattered civilians. In maybe 30 seconds, they'd all be dead. Hazel made a decision that would change her life forever. She sprinted from cover, bullets cracking past her, and dove behind the overturned vehicle where the Marine lay. She checked him quickly, no pulse, multiple gunshot wounds, but his gear was intact. She grabbed his M4 rifle. The weapon felt both foreign and familiar in her hands, foreign because she hadn't held a military rifle since basic firearms training 6 months ago, familiar because the principles were the same as the hunting rifles she'd grown up with in Texas. The safety was off. A full magazine was loaded. The selector switch showed it was set to semi-automatic. Hazel flicked it to full auto. The enemy fighters were maybe 20 meters away, walking toward the scattered civilians with the confidence of hunters approaching trapped prey. They were talking among themselves, not expecting any resistance from a bunch of contractors and clerks. Hazel rose from behind the vehicle and opened fire. The M4 bucked against her shoulder as it spat bullets in full automatic mode. Her first burst caught the lead fighter center mass, dropping him instantly. She shifted aim and fired again, catching the second fighter before he could react. The remaining 6 fighters dove for cover, suddenly realizing they weren't dealing with helpless civilians anymore. Holy shit, Morrison's voice carried over the gunfire. Carter, what are you doing? Staying alive, Hazel called back, reloading the M4 with practiced efficiency. Everyone get to cover, move toward the command bunker. I'll provide covering fire. She didn't wait for a response. The enemy fighters were regrouping, trying to flank her position. Hazel shifted to a better firing position and waited for them to show themselves. There. Movement behind a shipping container. She fired a controlled burst, sparks flying from the metal as her bullets found their target. A scream indicated she'd hit something. The civilians were moving now, scattered but heading toward the command bunker. Morrison was trying to organize them, get them moving as a group, but enemy fire kept forcing them to take cover. Hazel realized she needed to be more aggressive. She grabbed the dead Marine's remaining magazines, 4 of them, 30 rounds each, and began moving forward, not retreating, not holding position, but advancing toward the enemy fighters who were trying to kill the people she'd been working alongside for 6 months. Carter, fall back, Morrison shouted. Negative, Hazel replied, firing another burst that sent 2 enemy fighters scrambling for new cover. Keep moving, I've got this. She didn't know if she had this. She'd never been in combat, had never fired at another human being, had never faced the chaos and terror of a real firefight. But she was learning fast, and the lessons were written in blood and adrenaline. The enemy fighters were professional, trained, experienced, but they'd expected to be hunting sheep, not fighting a wolf. They'd come prepared to massacre helpless contractors, not duel with someone willing to stand and fight. Hazel used their confusion ruthlessly. She moved constantly, never staying in one position long enough for them to get a fix on her. Fire, move, always advancing, always putting pressure on them, always making them react to her instead of executing their own plan. A fighter appeared around the corner of a building, AK-47 raised. Hazel's M4 spoke first, a 3-round burst that put the man down permanently. Another tried to circle around her flank. She saw him coming, shifted position, and caught him in the open. 5 rounds, center mass. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The remaining fighters were breaking, their tactical cohesion falling apart under pressure from a single determined shooter who refused to be intimidated. Hazel reloaded again, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. The civilians were moving better now, getting closer to the command bunker under her covering fire, but she could see more enemy fighters emerging from other parts of the base. Carter. A new voice, this one with authority. She turned to see Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a Marine squad leader, approaching with 3 other Marines. All of them looked at her with expressions of amazement. "What the hell are you doing?" "My job," Hazel replied, not taking her eyes off the battlefield. "Where do you need me?" Torres blinked. "You're a civilian contractor. I'm a person with a rifle who doesn't want to die tonight," Hazel corrected. "And from the sound of things, you need every shooter you can get. Where's the main attack?" Torres studied her for a moment, taking in her steady hands, her proper firing stance, the pile of enemy bodies around her position. "Eastern perimeter. They've breached the wire in 3 places. We're falling back to secondary positions." "Then let's not fall back," Hazel said. "Let's go forward." "Ma'am, with respect, you're not trained for..." "Sergeant, I just eliminated 6 enemy combatants in close quarters combat while providing covering fire for 30 civilian evacuees. How much more training do you think I need?" Torres looked around at the bodies, then at his Marines, then back at Hazel. "Jesus. Okay, you're with us, but you follow orders and you don't do anything heroic. We work as a team." "Roger that." They moved toward the eastern perimeter as a unit, 4 Marines and 1 very determined civilian contractor. The sound of gunfire was intense from that direction, punctuated by explosions and the occasional scream. As they got closer, they could see the tactical situation was bad. The enemy had blown 3 large gaps in the wire and was pouring fighters through them. The Marines' defensive positions were being overrun, and they were falling back toward the center of the base. "Command says there's at least 50 hostiles inside the perimeter," Torres reported over his radio. "Maybe more. They're trying to take the command bunker and the communication center." "Rules of engagement?" asked one of his Marines. "Kill them all," Torres replied grimly. "This is a fight for the base." They took position behind a concrete barrier that gave them a good field of fire across the main approach to the command bunker. From here they could see enemy fighters moving in small groups, trying to advance under covering fire from their comrades. "Targets," Torres called out. "Engage at will." Hazel sighted through her M4's iron sights and found her first target, an enemy fighter with an RPG setting up to fire at a defensive position. Range about 100 meters. She fired a controlled burst, and the fighter dropped. "Nice shot," one of the Marines muttered. The enemy reacted to their fire, turning attention toward their position. Bullets began impacting the concrete barrier, sending chips flying. But Hazel had learned something in her first firefight: fear was manageable if you had something to do, and right now her job was shooting enemy fighters. She worked methodically, picking targets and engaging them with controlled bursts. The M4 was getting hot from sustained fire, but it didn't jam, didn't fail. Every time she squeezed the trigger, an enemy fighter went down. "Carter," Torres called over the gunfire, "you're burning through ammo pretty fast." Hazel checked her remaining magazines. 2 left. "I'll make them count." "Here." One of the Marines, a young lance corporal, tossed her 2 of his magazines. "You're shooting better than half my squad." The battle raged for another hour, wave after wave of enemy fighters trying to advance, met by increasingly desperate defensive fire from the remaining Marines. Hazel lost count of how many fighters she'd engaged. The M4's barrel was too hot to touch, but she kept firing. Then the ammunition started running low for everyone. "We need to fall back," Torres said reluctantly. We can't hold this position without more ammo. Where do we fall back to? Asked one of his Marines. The command bunker. Make our final stand there. No. Hazel said quietly. Ma'am, no. She repeated more firmly. We don't fall back. We've been reacting to them all night. Let's make them react to us. Torres stared at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we take the fight to them. They're expecting us to hunker down and defend. What if we didn't? What if we went hunting instead? That's insane. We're outnumbered at least 10 to 1. So, they don't know that, and they're scattered all over the base in small groups. If we move fast and hit them where they don't expect it, we can take them apart piece by piece. The Marines exchanged glances. It was crazy. It was also the kind of thinking that sometimes won battles when conventional tactics failed. You ever done anything like this before? Torres asked. No. Hazel admitted, but I grew up hunting, and the principle is the same. You don't wait for the prey to come to you. You go find it. Torres made a decision that probably saved the base. Okay, we hunt, but we do it smart. We move as a team. We hit fast. We get out before they can react. And Carter, yeah, you're not a contractor anymore. Tonight, you're a Marine. They spent the next 3 hours moving through the base like ghosts, hunting enemy fighters in the darkness. Hazel proved to be a natural at small unit tactics, her instincts honed by years of tracking game in the Texas wilderness translating perfectly to tracking human prey in an urban environment. They would identify a group of enemy fighters, approach from an unexpected direction, hit them with overwhelming firepower, and then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. Hit and run, strike and fade, always moving, always hunting. Hazel's M4 spoke with deadly accuracy. Every shot was placed with the precision she'd learned shooting deer at long range but adapted for the close quarters combat of urban warfare. She didn't spray bullets wildly. She aimed, fired controlled bursts, and watched targets drop. By dawn, the mathematics of the battle had shifted dramatically. What had started as 50 attackers against 200 defenders had become something closer to an even fight as Hazel and Torres's team systematically eliminated enemy fighters throughout the base. Command, this is Torres, the sergeant reported over his radio. We count 23 enemy Kia in our sector. Remaining hostiles appear to be falling back. Copy that, Torres. Outstanding work. What's your ammunition status? Torres looked around at his team. They were all running low. Hazel was down to her last magazine. Low, but manageable, Torres replied. Reinforcements are inbound. Estimate 15 minutes. Can you hold until then? We'll hold. But as they spoke, one final group of enemy fighters made a desperate assault on the command bunker. 6 fighters with automatic weapons running across open ground, determined to complete their mission even if it killed them. They didn't see Hazel and the Marines until it was too late. Hazel's final magazine held 30 rounds. She used 28 of them in controlled bursts, each burst dropping a fighter until all 6 attackers lay motionless in the courtyard. The base fell silent except for the crackle of fires and the moans of wounded. Jesus Christ, one of the Marines whispered. Carter, how many is that? Hazel performed a quick mental count. 17 confirmed, maybe more. Torres stared at her. 17. You killed 17 enemy fighters in one night. We killed them, Hazel corrected. This was teamwork. No. Torres said firmly. We helped. But you were something else out there, something I've never seen before. The reinforcements arrived, a full company of Marines with air support. By full daylight, the base was secure, the remaining enemy fighters either dead or fled. The after-action reports would show that 53 enemy fighters had attacked the base. 39 were killed, the rest escaped. Of the casualties inflicted by the defending force, Hazel Carter, civilian IT contractor, was credited with 17 confirmed kills, but the numbers didn't capture what had really happened that night. Later that morning, as the base was being secured and casualties were being treated, Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, found Hazel sitting alone, cleaning the M4 rifle that had become an extension of herself over the past 6 hours. Ms. Carter, he said, approaching carefully. I wanted to speak with you. Hazel looked up, exhaustion evident in her green eyes. Sir, I've read the preliminary reports. They make for interesting reading. 17 enemy combatants killed in action. Successful defense of civilian evacuation. Tactical leadership of a Marine fire team. All by someone whose official job description is Network Systems Administrator. I just did what needed to be done, sir. Yes, you did. The question is why. You're a civilian. You could have stayed in the bunker, let the Marines handle the fighting. No one would have blamed you. Hazel thought about that for a moment. Colonel, 6 months ago when I came to this base, I was just someone who fixed computers. But over these months, this place became home. These people became my people. When someone attacks your home and threatens your family, you don't hide in a bunker. You fight. Harrison nodded slowly. Miss Carter, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. The Marine Corps is always looking for exceptional people, people with natural leadership, tactical instinct, and the kind of courage you displayed last night. If you were interested, and this is purely hypothetical, there might be opportunities for someone with your skills. Hazel looked down at the M4 in her hands, then at the base around them, then at the Marines moving purposefully about the duties. What kind of opportunities? Officer candidate school, a commission, a chance to turn what you discovered about yourself last night into a career serving your country. I'd have to give up my civilian job. Yes, I'd have to start over, learn military protocols, prove myself all over again. Yes, I'd probably face skepticism, questions about whether a former contractor can really be a Marine officer. Almost certainly. Hazel was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and for the first time since the attack began, Harrison saw the person she'd been before she'd become a warrior. Colonel, where do I sign? 3 months later, Second Lieutenant Hazel Carter stood at attention in her dress blue uniform, having completed an accelerated officer candidate school program designed for candidates with exceptional qualifications. The commandant of the Marine Corps himself had come to pin on her gold bars, having read the reports from Fob Riverbend with great interest. Lieutenant Carter, he said after the ceremony, you represent something important to this Corps. You represent the idea that Marines aren't born, they're made. They're made in moments of crisis when ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things. Sir, you were just doing what Marines do. You saw a threat to your fellow Americans, and you eliminated that threat with skill, courage, and leadership. That's what we do. That's who we are. He paused, then continued. You have a choice now, Lieutenant. You can have any assignment you want. Staff job at headquarters, training command, military education, whatever you want. Hazel thought for a moment. Sir, I'd like to go back to Afghanistan, back to a forward operating base. There are Marines out there doing the hard work, and I'd like to be with them. The commandant smiled. I thought you might say that. Very well, Lieutenant. You'll be given command of a rifle platoon. Think you can handle it? Hazel thought about that night at Fob Riverbend, about the M4 rifle that had felt so natural in her hands, about the moment when a civilian contractor had become something more. Sir, I'm ready to find out. 6 months later, Lieutenant Hazel Carter was back in Afghanistan, leading a platoon of Marines in combat operations. The Marines under her command knew her story. Everyone in the Corps knew about the contractor who'd held off 50 attackers with nothing but an M4 and determination. But they followed her not because of what she'd done before, but because of what she did every day, led from the front, share the risks, and bring her people home. One evening, as they were returning from a patrol, her radio operator, Corporal Davis, asked her a question that had been bothering him. Lieutenant, can I ask you something? Shoot. That night at Riverbend, when you grabbed that rifle and started fighting, were you scared? Hazel considered the question seriously. Terrified. More scared than I'd ever been in my life. Then why did you do it? Hazel looked at the Marines around her, young men and women who'd volunteered to serve their country, who trusted her to lead them, who deserved better than a leader who stayed safe in bunkers while they fought. Because fear is just a feeling, Corporal. It doesn't get to make decisions. And when I looked around that night and saw people I cared about in danger, the decision made itself. Davis nodded, filing that answer away for future reference. As they approached their base, Hazel reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been a civilian contractor fixing computers, invisible to the warriors around her. Now she was one of those warriors, leading Marines in combat, responsible for lives and missions that mattered. The transformation hadn't been easy. Officer candidate school had pushed her to physical and mental limits she hadn't known she possessed. Learning to lead Marines, men and women who'd volunteered to serve, who deserved the best leadership she could provide, had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. But it had also been the most rewarding, because she'd learned something that night at Fob Riverbend, something that had changed her understanding of herself forever. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of fear. It was standing up when it would be easier to stay down. It was grabbing a rifle and fighting when it would be safer to hide. And sometimes it was discovering that the warrior you needed to be had been inside you all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Hazel Carter had been called many things in her life: computer geek, civilian contractor, non-combatant, someone to be protected rather than someone who protected others. But after that night at Fob Riverbend, she'd be called something else: Marine. The warrior who'd risen from behind a keyboard to stand behind a rifle. The contractor who'd become a combatant when her people needed her most. The woman who'd proven that heroes don't always come from expected places. Sometimes they come from the person fixing your computer, who turns out to have been a warrior all along. A year after that transformative night, Lieutenant Carter received an unexpected visitor at her forward operating base. Colonel Harrison, now promoted to Brigadier General, had come to check on her progress. As he watched her brief her platoon before a patrol, he marveled at the transformation. "You know," he told her after the briefing, "when I offered you that commission, I thought I was taking a risk. A civilian contractor with no formal military training, jumping straight into leadership. Some of my peers questioned the decision. And now, sir?" Hazel asked, adjusting her gear. "Now I realize I wasn't taking a risk at all. I was recognizing something that was already there." He paused, watching her Marines prepare with the confidence that came from following a leader they trusted. The Marine Corps has a saying: every Marine a rifleman. But you taught us something else that night. You taught us that every American can be a Marine when the moment demands it. When you grabbed that M4, you weren't becoming something new. You were revealing who you'd always been. Hazel smiled, the same expression she'd worn that morning when she decided to trade her contractor badge for Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. "Sir, I think I just finally found the job I was meant to do." As her patrol moved out into the Afghan countryside, Hazel carried with her the lessons of that October night, that courage is a choice, that heroes emerge when needed most, and that sometimes the person who saves everyone is the one nobody expected to fight. The IT contractor was gone forever. In her place stood a United States Marine, leading from the front, ready for whatever came next. Because once you've held the line with 17 confirmed kills and an M4 that ran red hot, everything else is just details. But the memory of that night at Fob Riverbend would forever define her, not because she'd proven herself to the Marines, she'd already known what she was capable of, but because she'd discovered that courage isn't learned in boot camp or officer training school. It's revealed in moments when ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things, when civilians become warriors not through training but through necessity, and when the person everyone underestimated becomes the hero everyone needed. Years later, when young Marines would ask Lieutenant Carter about leadership, about finding courage under fire, about what it meant to be a warrior, she would tell them the truth: you don't become brave by wanting to be brave. You become brave by doing what needs to be done when people you care about are in danger. The rifle doesn't make you a warrior. Your willingness to use it to protect others does. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the weight of command and responsibility pressed heavy on her shoulders, Hazel would remember that October night when everything changed, when a computer contractor grabbed an M4 and held the line, when fear became fuel and duty became destiny.